In part 2, we'll focus on app design and integration. This is where we're going to integrate that logic that we have created in our previous part while building our user interface. So first things first, in our run app, we're going to inject the provider scope. This will allow us to be able to read and access the providers that we have created in our logic. So let's just import the Flutter Riverpod. Great. Let's refresh our app. Good. No errors. Next, in our material app, let's set our title to the name of our app, which is an expense tracker. And then I'll proceed to install the Google fonts so that I can use the Poppins Google fonts. This is optional. We'll simply, in the theme data, we'll simply set the text theme and define the font that we want to use from the Google Fonts package. Let's refresh our app. Okay. Now we proceed. We want to set the initial root and then specify the roots in the roots attribute. So the initial root will have we'll call a specific class. Let's design it in our home.dat file. So we'll create a stateful widget or a class called home that extends the stateful widget, and we will return a scaffold. Let's add it in our roots. And now let's work on, okay, let's just refresh since we have changed the roots. Now let's work on our home class. We'll set the background to white. Then our body will hold a single child scroll view, and the child will hold a safe area. We won't be using an app bar in this design. Then we'll proceed to add a column widget, which will have a list of children that will be displayed vertically. So we'll start with a text widget that says widget for home, the same widget for expenses, widget for stats, widget for gallery, and lastly for settings. So there we have them. Let's set up padding 20. Okay. Now we want to define our bottom navigation bar. I'll proceed to use a specific package called Salomon bottom bar. Let me show you that it is Salomon bottom bar. So before we define it, we want to create a function that will dynamically create for us the bar items. So we'll call it create bottom bar item, and we'll need two arguments, an icon and a string. So inside it, we'll return a Salomon bottom bar item that holds an icon that has been passed in the argument, and the title will be hold a text widget that holds a string that has been passed in the argument. Then we'll specify the selected color to colors.teal, which will be our brand color throughout the app. Now let's go and define our bottom navigation bar to the Salomon bottom bar, and then our items, we'll design them using the create bottom bar item, passing in the icon and the string. For home, expense, stats, gallery, and settings. Great. So we're going to define the current index. By default, it's a 0, but we just want to have a variable that will manage the state for that. So we're going to define an int variable. We'll name it cindex is equals to 0 and pass it there. Then we're going to call the onTap function. And inside it will manage the state. When the user taps on a specific index, it will be saved in the cindex variable. So now we're able to see our bottom bar is working properly. So now what we want, these specific text widgets that we've displayed, they should be displayed on different, or depending on the tab, on the bar item that has been tapped. So we want to manage that. So we're going to create a folder called widgets that will hold all our widgets. So we're designing the first one, expense home, which will be a stateful widget. And this is the one that's going to represent the widget that will be displayed when you click on the home bar item. Let's just set it as home first. And then this is what we're going to replace to the static information that we've passed there. And we're going to do the same for the rest. We'll create another widget for expense, call it expense screen.dart. And then we're going to design a stateful widget and call the class expense widget. Define the text as expense. Pick the class and paste it where the second child. Then we design another one for stats. So we're going to create a stateful widget, name the class stats widget, and pass in a text stats. Pick it and paste the class as the third widget, third child. Let's do the same for gallery and settings. And paste it and import it, and there we have it. So next we are going to manage what goes where when a user taps on a specific bottom bar item. So we'll have a map object that will hold values of type boolean for every index of the bottom bar items. 0 refers to home, 1 to expense, like that. Now that we have that, we want to proceed to our onTap. On top, in the set state, when our user clicks, we first initialize all the values in our map object to false. And then now we pick whatever the user selected and set it to true. Yes. So now that we have done that, for us to see the effect, we need to set up a prop that's required from these classes, and which will be the map object. So it will always be passed whenever we are calling these classes. So let's do the same for all of them. First, let's pass them on the home screen and do the same for all the classes. They'll always expect a specific prop passed. Great. Now that we have the props, there is still work that we need to do on the specific classes. But first, let's handle the scroll controller. Since all this is in one widget, which is a single child scroll view, and they're displayed vertical, we want to make sure when the user taps on a specific tab and displays a specific widget, we're able to see it like it's from the beginning, or when the offset is equals to 0 from the beginning of the screen. We'll get to see that. So in our expense home, what we're doing, we're wrapping our text with visibility widget and specifying the visible to the whatever we get from the view object, and we pick the index, which is 0. For home, it's 0. So if it's true, it will display home. That's what it means. We want to handle what is visible and what is not. So for the expense, it will always be visible if the index of the map object, if the index 1 is true. That's what it means. Same for the stats widget. Visible only if view index 2 is true. That's what it means. So you can see our widgets are reducing in the home screen. At the end, you'll find that it's only home will be displayed in the home section. And lastly, we have settings. There we have it. So in our screen, if we head over to expense stats, as you can see what I meant, now we're able to see the respective widgets that we need to see, and there is what depending on what the user taps. Now let's work on the home widget. So instead of the text widget, we need a column to display a list of children vertically, starting with a row widget. And in our row, we'll have a text widget that says expense tracker, which is the name of our app, and we'll just design it. Great. Next, let's define a spacer. What the spacer does, it will just push everything to its right, to the far right, and everything to the left to the far left. So let's design an icon button next, which will be for searching. We'll hold an icons.search. We'll implement the search functionality there. Then we'll have another icon button where we'll showcase the concept of data synchronization. We'll get to see that. We'll create a new file called expenseheader.dat will define a specific class called header widget. It will be a consumer stateful widget. We'll be interacting with some of the providers that we created. So a header widget is mainly that section where I choose a budget and the number of the sum of expenses, and also our donut chart. Now that we've injected it in our home widget, let's design it and see it come to life. So we're going to have a card, and our card will hold a column of children. And the first child will be a list style, and the title will be a text widget. There is our card, and we'll also have a subtitle, which will be a text widget. Let's set our text so that we see the effects of our styles. There we have it. Now we want to install the intl package to allow us to format our dates. So instead of writing a static text, we're going to use the date format. We're going to get today's date with datetime.now, and then we format it. What we need is the month, but in text format, because with datetime.now we get the int, which is for November it will be 11. So just use the date format and it has displayed for us the text November. And for the year, we just use datetime.now.year. It will provide for us the year directly to string because it's of type double. And there we have it. So we've removed our static data. The next child in our column would be a sized box, and this sized box is the one that's going to hold our donut chart, or let me define it as a percent indicator because that's the name of the package. So let's proceed to install that package. Percent indicator. So let's add it as a child. Okay, we're using the wrong widget. Okay, it's circular percent indicator. Okay, now we can see our attributes, the radius. We set the line width to 30. There we have it. Our progress color will be our brand color, colors.teal. Then we'll set the animation to true. Circular stroke cap will be dot round. And then we'll have our percent, which will hold a value. So at the top, we're going to define a variable called percent of type double and set it initially as 0. Then we pass it there. Let's change. Oh, it's between 0 and 1.0, makes sense. So 0.7 maybe. There we have it. That's how it would look. So we'll set it back to 0. The arithmetic or the calculation for percent is the total sum of the expenses divided by the budget. So we need to define that. So we'll have a variable of type double that represents the total sum of expenses, and another variable that will hold the value of the budget that we have specified for this month. Then inside our build, we're going to define the arithmetic where we say percent is equals to total value divided by budget value. So we'd expect a decimal value. Great. So our total value and our budget value will get them from our providers. They're coming from different providers. So we'll define our first variable, budget, and we'll get it or we'll watch it from the expense budget provider. Let's just import budget, and also we'll have another variable called the total, which will watch from the expense main provider, and it's a sync value because we're returning a future. And because of that, we need to handle that as well. We can't pass a future in a value that we expect a double. So we'll say total value is equals to, we set up a switch case and pass in the total and say async data, we get the value from the future and return it. So ours will be just a double, so that's fine. Else, if there's an error, instead of leaving the user hanging, let's just default it to 0. Else, let's just default it to 0. Right. For the budget value, we're going to do the same, but now we're going to use the budget variable, and it returns a budget object. So we need to get value.amount, and if it's null, we return 0, error 0, else 0. So now when we'll get the percent after getting the total sum and also getting the budget. Great. So that's how we're interacting with our providers from our Riverpod per se. So the next thing we want to do is we're going to create a rich text that will display the total sum of expenses, and we're getting all this from our provider, which we're getting from the functions that we created that involves interacting with Isar. So we're just designing a rich text. Rich text just allows us to provide different styles for different texts that are in one widget. So that's all we're doing. So as you can see, the first value is a total value, which is a total sum. And then we're giving it a style. There it is. And then we want to add another text that will be over. That's a symbol for over. So total sum of expenses over the budget. And we're just going to give it its own style. And lastly, we'll have another text that represents the budget value. We'll give it a separate color. And there we have it. So let's set padding, the top and the bottom. Great. Next, we need a button. Our button is the one that allows us to create a budget and also update. We'll reuse it for two roles. But first, let's create budget. So it will, let's add a styling for it. There we have it. Let's update the font to our brand color. Looks better. Now what we want to do is add logic for our button. So we'll proceed to add a show dialog. When the user clicks on the create budget, it will open up an alert dialog that allows them to enter the budget that they want to set for the month. So we'll have a title that just says budget. Let's just style it. Before that, let's see. Let's refresh it. There we have it. Now let's finish it up. Let's give it a controller, text editing controller. Let's decorate it. There we have it. Let's add the button. There we have it. Okay, so we need to add logic for save. Now let's create a function called create new budget, and we'll pass in our async value of type budget, which we already defined at the top. So what we're going to do, from watching the expense budget provider, we want to check if the budget.value is equals to null, meaning that there's no budget value that has been set for this specific month. We're going to proceed to read our provider, and then we're going to call the method create and pass in our amount, the amount that the user will insert in our alert dialog. Else, if there is a value, we want to allow the user to actually update. So we'll define our variable called budget and do a switch case where we're checking this budget, and what we're going to do with the value that's returned, final value, we're going to pick that value, and if there's an error in picking that value, we return null, else return null, any other else case that may occur. So let's just rename the variable. Okay, so now what we're going to do is check if that variable is not equal to null. Okay, we're going to proceed to set the amount of that object to whatever the user has set in the text field, and then we proceed to read the provider, the expense budget provider, and call the edit budget method and pass in our budget object. So that's what the function is doing. It's doing two things. It's allowing the user to be able to create if there is no budget set, and also edit using the two methods in the provider. So we're just adding a try and catch using the Isar error class. And if there is an error, we'll be able to print out, or actually we'll be able to show a snack bar showing the specific error that we're experiencing. So you can use the Isar error class to display an error, or to get an error that may occur. So let's do that. And then we do a navigator.pop because we are doing all this inside an alert dialog. So that's what the function is doing. It's doing two things, allowing us to create a budget or edit a budget depending on what is we receive from the Isar database. Great. So we proceed to enter a value of our budget, 5,300, and you can see our state has been updated and we're able to view the budget we have set. Beautiful. That was fast. Now we want to proceed to check on our Isar Inspector. We get it from the link whenever we load the app. And as you can see, in our budget collection, we have the amount that we have set. We have the object that we have set. Great. Now, so if we have created the budget already, we want to be able to handle, it's more of user experience. If we already have a budget available, we want to be able to allow the user to edit. So we just want to be able to, if there's a value of there's a budget value, we're able to display it on the text editing controller or the text field itself, and then we'll be able to change the text, create budget to edit budget. So we're just setting up a user experience feature. So we're just saying budget controller.text is equals to whatever is received from the budget value to string. So if we click that, as you can see, it's able to display. And then now, instead of create budget, we want to handle that as well. If the user has already set a budget, the probable functionality that they want is to edit that budget, right? So we're just doing a condition, budget.value is equals to null. If it's equals to null, let's set the text to create budget, else let's set the text to edit budget. And there we have it. So let's proceed to edit the budget again to 6,000 and save. And as you can see, our state has been updated. Let's just see it in our Isar Inspector, and as you can see, our amount has been updated. Great. Now we are done with the header widget. We can proceed to work on the rest of the screen. So we'll call the title widget. Let's create a new file called expense title.dat. This will hold a text widget that will represent most of the titles that we'll display in our app. So you just want to set it in one place so that you don't have to repeat the code over and over again. So our props will be a title and the color. Those are the two things that will be passed whenever we call this class. So let's set padding only at the top. Great. So now let's use it in our expense screen, and then specify the title that we want to display, which is expenses, and the color will be black. There we have it. Let's define our cross-axis alignment to start. Great. Now we proceed to create another widget called expense date, sorry. So the expense date is a design of the date of a specific expense of today exactly, because the list of expenses that we're displaying on the home screen are the expenses for the current day. So that's what we're going to display. So we'll have a container that will hold a row, and the row will have children, starting with a text widget, and the text widget will contain a date. So we need to pass it from the expense screen. So all we're going to do is format the datetime.now, and what we're returning is the date. So there we have it. Then we're going to style it, and as you can see, we can see our date. Another thing that we'll need is set a sized box over width. Another way to do this is to set padding on either the first text widget or the second, but I'm just using a sized box to create space between the first text widget and the other one. So another thing that we'll need is the day. And to get the day, we'll use the date format as well. .eeeee, that will return the actual day, either Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So we'll proceed to call it there, and as you can see, we have our day. Great. Now we want to create a border using the container around this row widget. So first we're going to set it the border radius to circular, and proceed to set the color of the border. And there we have it. Now let's handle the margin and the padding so that it looks more presentable. There we have it. So there is our expense date. Now let's look at the next widget that we'll need, which will be the expense list.dat. As I had mentioned, that's now the one that will display a list of expenses for today. So we'll call the class expense list widget, and as you can see, we're going to extend the consumer stateful widget because we'll be interacting with some of the providers that we created. We're just passing in the widget to our home widget. And now let's work on our expense list widget. We'll create a new file called expense list without filter and one with filter. So this expense list, we're going to reuse it a lot because we have so many places where we'll need to display a list of expenses due to the filtering process, and also for other sections. Like for example, the one on the home screen, it will display a list of expenses for today without allowing the user to provide any filter options. That's what we mean by expense list without filter. But there'll be a section where we'll allow the user to filter through or set some filter options. That's what we mean by expense list with filter. So we just want to have those two separate. So we'll create a class, a stateless class for expense list without filter. And then now we come here, we need to let's see, pass in a prop in this class of type bool. So all we want to know is whenever we are passing calling the expense list widget, is the filter false? Do you want the filter to be false or true? So in our case, it's false. And if it's false, it's going to display so widget.filter. If it is true, it will display the expense list with filter. Else, it will display the expense list without filter. There we have it. So what the function that we need is get today's expenses, which is in our func.dart. So we're going to proceed to create a future builder that will be able to call that function for us and display it for us in a view, in a list view. Then we're going to return the expense list without filter. There we have it. So we'll work on the expense list with filter later. So now let's proceed to install a package I like to use, which is the empty widget. So that if there's no data to display, we're able to tell the user that there's no data to display yet. It has an amazing UI interface, so that's why I like using it. So now that we have it, we want to create a widget, a class for it separately instead of recreating the empty widget over and over again. So we'll name the file expense empty widget. And our class will be we'll extend the stateless widget, name it expense empty widget, and then we'll just call the empty widget package, define the attributes. Now the title will be expense tracker, the name of our app. But now the subtitle, we can allow our props to be passed. Yeah, and whatever will be passed is what will set it there. Let's design this, set the style. There we have it. Now let's pass it in our future builder. What we'll do is check if snapshot.hasData will return the expense list without filter. That's fine. Else, let's return the expense empty widget. And then we proceed to specify the subtitle. What do we want to display to the widget? So no expenses available yet. Great. So we need to do another check. There might be data in the snapshot, but it might be empty or null. So we want to do that check as well. So if the snapshot.data is equals to null, we call our empty widget, else we call our expense list without filter class. So let's design our expense list without filter class. We're going to hold a list view or return a list view. For the item count, let's first set it as 5, but we'll change it. So in our item builder, we'll proceed to return a row, and it will consist of a few items. It will consist of an image of the category. It will also consist of the name of the expense, and then it will consist of the date and the amount. Okay, so I just want to have a list of images in our assets folder. I'll just paste them there. So here we have them. So those are the ones that represent the categories that we're using in the app. And then you need to make sure that you uncomment this section in the pubspec.yum. Okay, so now let's design our row. So we'll call the image.assets. Assets, let's set a static path first just to see how the design looks. Let's add it in the children attribute, okay, with 30. So our separator builder will just be a simple divider with a thickness of 0.5, the color, brand color that we have. So, okay, the vertical viewport was given unbounded. So let's set the shrink wrap in our expense list without filter in our list view. True. And there we have our dividers, but our images are not loading. Need to restart that again. There we have. So now we're able to see our images, we're able to see our divider. So let's define the list tile, which is another child in the row widget. So our title will be the name or the text that we're going to give for the expense. Let's just style it. Let's set a box constraint for it by defining the width. There we have it. If we refresh, we'll get to see the name. Great. So now we can see the name. For the trailing, we'll have the amount of that expense. Let's give it a style. So that's the idea. That's how our design will look for the list of expenses. Okay. So now that we have that, we want to create a props in this class that will be passed, and that will be the list of expenses from the snapshot in our future builder. And that's the one that we're going to pass through our static data. So let's go back and just pass it, remove the const, and then we'll proceed to now replace the static data that we have set with what is from the snapshot. So we'll just say snapshot.data.length, and then for the amount will be snapshot.data, because the budget could be null. We get the index and then we pick the amount. Remember, it's a budget object. So we're just passing in a $sign to be displayed together with the amount. Next will be snapshot.data. So we need to create a config.dat, and we'll create a map object, which I'll just paste it here, that will represent our categories, but now in form of it will contain the name. It won't consist of enum values. It will be just the name, the icon, the selected, like more information about a specific category. So, but on the budget object, what we save is the enum value, right? So what we're going to do, we're going to get that enum value, then we get its index, and that index is what we'll use to pass in the categories list object that we have in our config, so that we can get the name, the actual name. There's another way to do this also, but we'll proceed with that. Then in the path for the image, we're going to do the same, but now we have to make sure we pass in the assets text in front, so that you can be able to display the actual image. So there's that. So that's how we're getting the image and the name of the category of that specific expense. So now if we try to refresh, of course there will be nothing because we haven't created any expense, but we should see our empty widget. So we need to add another condition. If snapshot.data, if it's empty, not only is it null, but if it's also empty, we should now display the empty widget. And there we have our empty widget displayed, which is correct because we don't have any expenses yet. So now we need to create an expense to be able to see this in effect. Yeah, so let's just head over to our expense screen. That's the one that represents the second tab. Now let's work on this. It will involve a form where the user enters and then able to add an expense. and hopefully we'll get to see in our home screen, we'll be able to see the expense that we've created. So the first things first, we'll have a child, which will be a form, and we're just designing setting or initializing a key for it, which we'll pass to it. So we're just adding our title, add expense. Then we're just giving a space using the sized box. Then proceed to create a text editing controller for amount. So we'll have a text form field that will hold this controller. So let's decorate it a little bit. So we're adding a $sign as the suffix. It's quite small. Let's increase the size. There we have it. Then we'll just add a padding to the right, to the left of the suffix. Yes, there's at least there's some space. Next, we'll create a row, another row that will have two children. The first one will be a text widget that will display the current date right now, or whatever the user will select from the calendar. The second one will now be an icon button that will allow the user to select from a calendar. So there we have it. Top. Icons.calendar month. Space between, great. So that's how it should look. But now we need a variable that will hold the date time. So it will be of type date time, and we'll call it selected date. but now we'll initialize it to the datetime.now, and that's what we're going to pass in our text widget. But we need it formatted, so we'll need the date format. So it's going to proceed to design it in a way that we'll have the day, the date, and the month. Format selected date. So it will have the day, the date, and then the month. Yes. So in our icon button, we'll proceed to show date picker, so we can allow the user to select a date. So the initial date will be the current date, and then first date will be date time this year. Then maybe the date time for last date will be maybe 2030. Then whatever we receive, we initialize it to the selected date and call the set state. So if we try to select 22, it updates. 19, it updates, so it's working great. Let's proceed. So we'll call the title widget class that we designed just to define a title called select category. There we have it. Let's set our cross-axis alignment to start. There we have it. Good. Now, in this section, we'll need to display a list of categories. We're just creating a space using the sized box, and then we're going to design a grid view that will display the 6 categories that we have. We'll create a new file called expense category item, which will represent a widget for every category that we'll design. So we'll call the class expense category item, and it will be a card. And this card will hold the image of the category and the name of the category. So we'll design this in using a column because they'll be aligned vertically. So there's some props that will need to be passed when calling this class, starting with the index, or mainly the index, because with the index and having the object in the config.dat, we'll be able to get the rest of the information. So we're just adding that in our expense screen. So index, which is already in the item builder, which is fine. Let's just set the shrink wrap true so that we don't get any issues of the viewport, and save that. Grid view, shrink wrap, grid item builder. Okay, we need to add the item count. We forgot that. It's very important. So we'll use a categories object in our config.dat. That's the one we're going to use to get the length. There we have it. So if we decide to view, there are our cards. You can see them, not too visibly. They don't have any items inside, but now you can see them. Now let's start adding our 2 children. We'll start with the image, setting the path, then we proceed to call based on the index. So it will be categories, the specific index, and then we pick the key icon. There we have it. Let's reduce the width. Okay. And then let's center these items. There we have it. Next will be the name of the categories. There we have it. Okay. So we've been able to display our categories. Next, we want when the user selects, we're able to create that effect where we're able to show the selected item. So we're going to add an inkwell or wrap the expense category item with an inkwell. You can also use a gesture detector. It depends on the one that you want. Then we're going to set state. When a user selects, we're going to define a specific variable called selected item. We'll set it to 0 first. But when a user selects, we save the index that they have tapped to the selected index, and then we expect to pass it to the expense category item. You'll get to see why we need it. So selected item, selected item. So why we need it is just to create that effect. So in our card, we'll proceed to say color. If the index is equals to the selected item, we'll proceed to set the color to something different, else set the color to white as is right now. So you can see the bills is selected, considering that initially we have set the values to 0, which is the first index. And also let's set the color because we can't see the name of the category. So I think that's better. What do you think? So as you can see now, we're able to see what the user has selected. Great. Next, what's the next thing? The next thing will be another text field. So we'll just create another text editing controller. Then we'll just copy the text form field that we had, although the settings will change, and call the subcat controller to the on that text form field. So what we need is to allow the user to enter a subcategory, maybe a text. If they select the category bills, you might want to define the subcategory as maybe electricity or water. You just get a chance to write it. So that's what this specific text form field is for. Next, we're going to just call the title widget again and just define another title called select payment method. Now let's proceed we'll need to go to proceed to create a drop down button, sorry. So that's the one that's going to provide a list of payment methods as I have pasted on the config.dat. So let's display them on the drop down button. Then we'll pass, let's see what's missing, to list. Great. Okay, so we're done with our drop down. Let's see. Yes, we're able to display our payment methods. And now let's stretch it out by setting is expanded to true. Now let's work on the next one, which will be a list style. And this list style, on the title, we're going to call the title widget class again, and pass in the text add receipt. And then we're going to have a trailing, which will hold an icon button. This will allow us to upload a file or upload an image. So let's see how that looks. There we have it. Yeah, I think that's more visible. So we'll need to add a package called file picker. That will allow us to upload a file, which in our case will be uploading images. So in our icon button, let's add some logic. So we're defining a variable called result of type file picker result, which will hold whatever the user has selected from the file picker. Great. So if the result is not equal to null, then we'll proceed to ask the user to enter or set a name for the file that we can save this image with. So we'll call the show dialog and return an alert dialog. So we'll just design it like last time. We'll have just one text field. And then set our actions. We'll have an elevated button. It will allow us to save. And then we'll have an outline button that will allow us to cancel. So let's see how that looks. Missing. Okay, let's restart our app. There we have it. So if we click on that, to allow us to access an image from our phone, enter the name, as you can see. But now we need to add more logic on this. Now that we have able to get the file and be able to get the name of the image that the user has set. So first things first, the easiest will be on the outline button where we cancel. We'll proceed to clear the file name controller first, and then we just do a navigator.pop. Now into our save button, we'll need to add some logic there, some extensive logic. So we'll just have a function called upload file, and it will pass an argument of type file, pick a result. Let's just call it there. So we're going to define a new variable of type file and pick whatever result that has been passed and get the path. In our mixin class, we had a function that allows us to get the path of get applications documents directory. So that's what we're going to pick by calling that function. So just injecting the mixin class. So that will be initialized to our up path string. We want to pick the full name. So when we are saving it, even if the user decides to, we are allowing the user to set the name of the file, right? But we need to store the same extension of the image, so we need to pick it. So we are doing some splitting, and then we're going to pick the last. We're going to reverse the array, or the list, sorry, which is equivalent to array in some other languages, just to pick the dot with the PNG or the JPEG or the extension in short. So that's what our our two lines are doing. So that when we are designing the file name variable as we are right now, we're going to have the name that the user has set and the date. We're going to format it to date, month, year, and then we're going to add in the PNG, the extension. So as you can see, we have a dot at the end. There's a dot, and then we proceed. Let me show. As you can see, we have a dot before we call the reserved variable, and then pick the index 0 because we have reversed it. So the first index is the one that's going to have the extension. Simply that. So that's how we have designed or restructured the file name, how the name of the file will be. And then we're just clearing the text field, and now we have our file name, we have our file. Now we can proceed to copy it to our new path, because there'll be a place where we'll be displaying our images, so we need to have the files themselves. So once we upload, we're able to store them or copy them in our respective app path, and it's the get applications documents directory. So we're copying it there. So the next thing we're doing, we're creating a set of type receipt. And what we're doing is that we want to be able to add all the receipts. So with this functionality, you can actually add more than one image. It's just that I'll be showing uploading one image, but you can actually add more than one. So every time we upload, we want to design the receipt object and add it in a set, because we'll later on have to upload them to the receipt collection. So that's what we're doing. So let's just add some user experience where we're able to show a loading effect in the process from the moment the user decides to upload a file to writing the name until when it's displayed on our screen. So we'll use a circular progress indicator for that. So the flag that we're using is a variable show. Let's handle it. We'll start from the moment the user selects an image. We set the show to true. But then, as I said, the moment the user uploads and sets their name, we'll be able to display those images that they have selected in this screen so that they get to see it. So what we're going to use to display that will be the grid view. Let's just add the shrink wrap to true. So we're able to copy our file to a new directory, but we need to hold these files as well. So what we're going to do is we're going to always create a new file based on the new path, and then we add it in a list object of type uint 8 list. So before, there's an old version where we could actually use this data type to upload images, but it seemed to have been removed. So that's what we're going to do. And now that we hold them, we're going to display them. So the item count will be files.length. And then now let's build our items. So we're just returning images from the memory. So we're going to use that files to actually display them. They'll all be displayed below it. We'll get to see it. Let's now finish the last input field that we need. So first we'll set the title widget to notes, and then we need a package called text field tags that will allow us to display multiple tags in a text field. So let's define its controller. It will also need a controller. So I've just picked the logic from pub.dev in the specific code on that package, because it's quite long. So what we're going to do is just update it, and then we get to see how it works. Just a minute. So as you can see, it's quite long. Another way would actually to have we would have a separate class for it, just that this is the only place we're going to use it. So I haven't considered that. So we have our field, but yeah, we need to add the did change dependencies, the dispose, and also set the text field tags controller in our init state. Let's see how that will work. So if we add, we still cannot see it. Okay, great, there we have it. So we're able to allow the user to actually enter some few tags related to the expenses, and you'll see how that will help us in the search functionality. And lastly, we have the elevated button, which will just say add. And inside here, we finally get to let's finish up with the aesthetics. It's very small, but this is a button that will allow us to create our expense finally. So let's set a fixed size for it. So in our logic, we'll need first to check if our form is valid, if everything has been set as it should. If it's valid, now we proceed to use a sync. We'll proceed to call the create expense function, which will require the specific arguments that we had set as in the previous part of the tutorial. So all we're doing is just adding. So for the categories, it will be category and num that's in our expense collection dot values, and picking the selected index item is an index. So it will pick depending on the index that has been passed. Then we have our subcat controller dot text and our drop down, and that's all. So if it's successful, that's when we'll proceed to, yes, it requires an await. If it's successful, then we need to send or display a success message. So I'll use the status alert package for that. So status alert dot show. And there we have our status alert. Great. So we want to create a simple function that will just reset our form whenever we are done. Because remember, all this is in a one single child scroll view, but we have designed it in a way that it looks like we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 scaffolds, which we don't. So we're going to also set the every text field controller, and also we're going to clear the description controller. Even the variables that we had initialized, we're going to reset that. And what else? There's I think it's a scroll controller. Yes, we had defined it in the home page. Let's see. How do we reset it so that so let's pass it within so that we can use it. We need to reset it as well. So down below in our reset form, we'll just say widget.scrollController.animate to. So the offset will be back to 0. So the screen will show that we are back to the top of the screen. And then we're just setting the duration and the animation. Simple as that. And we're done. Great. So that's what we'll pass there. So now let's refresh and try and create our first expense. So we're going to create an expense with $200 of the category will be bills. I just noticed that we did not remove, we're not supposed to remove the $sign from the text form field for subcategory. Just a minute. We don't need that, and then we don't need that. Yes. Okay, so let's center a subcategory like water, select the payment method, upload an image, set the name, save. Okay, let's see. We're not able to see our image. So what could be the problem? And also after uploading, that circular progress indicator should disappear. But let's see. The set state. Okay. Just refresh and feel that experience again. So we enter the amount, we select a date. Great. And then we set bills, subcategory water, payment cash, There is our image. Great. Enter some tags: monthly, water, cash. Then let's add. There we have it. So let's try and see in our Isar Inspector. As you can see, in our expense collection, we have one object created, which is awesome, and everything has been inserted. Yeah, our receipt property is empty, yet we have uploaded a file. Let's see what's wrong. So in our expense repository, create object. Okay, so there's something new that came in this new version. You have to run the collection.receipts.save for it to be saved. Wow, yeah. So for the items that are connected through Isar link to be able to be displayed, or to be saved, you need to call that method. So we're doing it again. Let's see how that will work. Monthly, cash, save. So let's see. Let's retry connection. So there we have it. We've been able to add our receipt and also the connection. We're able to see the expense of that particular receipt. Great. So back to our app, if we go home, we're able to see today's expenses. So it's working, and as you can see, the sum 200. So let's create another one just for the fun of it and see if our queries are working. So notes, there are our notes that will come in handy when searching. Save, and you can see the sum is actually correct. So we have 200 plus 100, that's 300. So our functionalities are working in a part one. Yeah. Okay, so next thing, so in our expense list without filter, so we're able to see the image, we're able to see the category, we're able to see the amount, but we want to see the rest of the information of that particular expense. So we're going to create a file called expense detail.dat, and the class name will be expense detail. So we'll return a scaffold. This will be a whole screen on its own. So let's add it in our roots. So we'll wrap our row with a gesture detector and navigate to the expense detail. So what we're going to do right now is just display it. Let's refresh our app. We want to see the scaffold first, but there will be some arguments I will need to pass. So there is our blank screen. Let's work on it. So let's set our class that will hold our arguments. And the argument that we'll need is the expense object, the whole of it. Then we'll play around with it inside the scaffold. So let's redefine our root. Then we're going to pass our expense object when we're calling the expense detail class. So what we'll pass in our as an expense will be snapshot.data, and then pick the specific index that has been tapped. Great. So now let's click on it. Let's work on our blank screen. We'll work with a safe area since we're not using an up bar. And then we'll have children. We'll have children inside a column, starting with a list style. Our title will hold a text widget, and that will hold the date of that specific expense, when that expense was added. And we're going to use the date format to just present it well. So we're going to display the day, which is Tuesday, and then we are going to style it. So that's just the title. Then we have the subtitle, which will work with the date as well. So, but now we're going to show the day. I'm going to show the day and the month. The month in with the name itself, November. Yes. So there we have it. That's the whole logic. Okay. So we're just going to style it. Styling will be an icon button. It will simply have the logic of navigator.pop. That's all it's doing. So we'll create a new file called expense divider because we're going to reuse it a lot. Instead of repeating the same code, we'd rather like call a class. So let's design it. It will be a custom divider with a thickness of 1.0, indent of 20 and indent of 20. Then we're just going to wrap it with a padding. There we have it. Let's now call it and pass it here because we're going to use it a lot. That's much better than recreating the code over and over again. Okay. So next thing we're going to call a title widget and give it the name amount. And then we'll have the text that will display the amount of a specific expense object that has been passed in our props. We're just adding a dollar currency sign for it. And let's finish styling it. Then we get to see how it looks. So there we have it. Okay. Yeah, that's better. So we're going to pass our expense divider again. Proceed to design the same column. So instead of amount, now we have category, and instead of showing the amount, we're going to show two things: the image of the category and the name of the category. That's why we have a row. So we're going to remove that $sign and then just call the category. Another category is an enum value. Okay, so we need to get the index, and that index is what we're going to use to check on our categories map object, and then pick the name. Same for assets. I'm just copying the same thing, but instead of the key name, we'll be passing icon, and there we have it. So this the category, the expense that we have selected is of the category bills. Yeah, that's much better. Okay. Next, we pass in our divider. Then we'll call at our title widget class to define another title called receipts. There we have it. And then let's use a feature builder, which will return for us a grid view. Because remember, in the add expense, we're giving the user the option to add more than one image. I may have shown my uploading one image. We can actually add more than one and add them to that specific expense. So we want to be able to display them. So that's why we are having a grid view that we will build. So in our mixin class, the function that we want to get is getting the configurations like path and count. It's not a huge logic, it's just configurations that we need to proceed to. For example, if you want to get the image asset, we'll need to get that path of where the images are, where we uploaded the images. So that's what the set configs function is for. So proceeding to get the path using the get path function, and then we're also getting the count from the expense.receipts.count. We're getting the number of receipts that we have so that we can know how to loop through in our grid view, and then we're just returning it in form of a map object. That's all. Just formatting how we want to use this information, so it doesn't have like Isar logic or some sort. So now that we have that, we have already through the set configs, we'll have the path and we'll have the count. So now let's get them and use them. So all we are doing is saying if snapshot.has data, we'll display our grid view. Else, we'll just return a text widget that says no data or no receipts to display. So let's get our configurations and we proceed to use them. So there we have it. And on the configs, one of the keys we want is count. So that's what we've passed in our item count. And then the path, which we'll use to display the image. And now we're getting the file name from the expense object. let's see, there we have it. So since we have only one image, we are displaying one image. You can actually upload more than one and they'll all display over there. That's what that whole logic was for. Now we're adding another expense divider. I think we'll take that and paste it. What we're displaying is the payment method that was used for this expense. Great. Next we call our expense divider again. And this is where now we add our tags, or we're just going to say more details and it's going to display our tags. There we have it. So let's align our category title to start. Yep, and there we have our expense detail page or screen. And we are good. So we are 2 tabs down. Now let's work on the stats widget, which we'll find in the expense statistics.dat. So we'll start with adding a column, and our first child will be a text that just states stats. Let's style it. In our stats, we're going to add a tab, like tabs. So I'll need a package called toggle switch that will allow me to switch between 2 tabs. There's a design concept that we're trying to do. So the first tab will display the general information and the other one will show the expense log. So we're going to use a toggle switch, and our labels will be general and another one will be expense log. Yep, there we have it. So now let's style it up now that we can see them and space it out. So let's manage the what is selected by having the variable stats. So the initial label index will be stats, but whenever we change, we should be able to manage the state of that specific stats variable, so which it will be do it on the on toggle. So we set stats is equals to index, whatever the user has selected. Let's set padding on at the top so it doesn't look too congested. That's better. Now we want to add logic for this. What do we display on the general? What do we display on the expense log? So let's create widgets for them. So we'll have the expense general statistics.dat that will show anything to do with the general tab. Will be displayed when a user selects the general tab, that is. And then okay, let's design that part. We'll just add the header widget. The header widget is the card that we designed in the home screen. That's what we're going to also display on the general. And then another file that we need is the expense expense log.dat, and then we'll just define the class, and it will be a consumer stateful widget. We'll get to see how we'll work with that. So just adding a child just to show the difference when we tap. So we're just going to align our child, which will be an icon button. And this is what will present our filter by using icons.tune. Let's just set the color, and then there we have it. So back to expense statistics. So what we're doing is we're saying if stats is equals to 0, display the general stats, else display the expense log. There we have it, since the general is one that was selected, and as you can see in this expense log, we're able to see our icon button as well. So now we need to edit our header widget class. In our general log, we don't need to see the edit budget. We don't need to allow the user to see the edit. It's just a statistics screen. So we just want a flag that will handle that. So we're going to use the visibility class to handle that. Okay, so we'll have an error on the expense home. So let's pass edit budget is true because this is in the home screen. And now in the general statistics, it will be false. And as you can see, we're not able to see that action. Great, so it's working. Now let's proceed to finishing up with a general log. What else do we need? So we'll create a file called expense category statistics.dat. So a column consists of a title widget that says expense over category. So we're going to display stats for that. So we're just creating a function called build widget to build for us or to generate for us these widgets rather than creating individually. So first I'm going to pass that to create a column, and the children will hold the build widget result, which is a list of type list widget. Now let's head over to our build widget. First thing we're going to remember the consumer widget. We're going to listen to or watch our expense main provider, which is going to return the total sum of the expenses. And then there's another thing we need, which is list double sum by category, where we listen it in expense category provider. We also had that. So this is going to return for us a list of doubles. That means the sum for specific categories. That's what it means. So let's just pass them in our build widget and then now design them. So final all is equals to, let's do a switch case. So for the total, if there is a value, we're going to return that value. If there is any error, we're going to return 0, else we return 0. So that's how we are handling it. Now let's do our for loop. If int I is equals to 0 and I is less than the length of categories.length, we'll say indicate final sum is equals to switch case sum category. Then we get the value, and we will get, since it's a list, we need to get the value using the index, using I. So value I, and if there's an error, what we'll proceed to do is return 0, else we return 0. So our sum by category comes in form of a list double. So it's the sum of all the categories in order. So we're checking through the sum of each individual category, then we are designing a linear percent indicator for it, aligned with the total sum of the expenses. So percent will be the sum of that specific category divided by all, which is a total sum of the expenses. So it's going, if since we have 6 categories, it's going to loop through 6 times. Let's see how that looks. Expense category statistics, we didn't add it, so let's add it. There we have it. So you find those values in the bills food, it's a sum of the expenses in bills over the total sum of expenses. So that's where we are. Next, let's work now on the expense log, which honestly has most of the work, because we are going to provide a list of filter options that we can think of, that we can interact with Isar Database with. So we'll proceed to create a feature builder that will just return for us the expense by count. We don't have that in the providers. So you'll find sometimes a certain functionalities we're not getting everything from the Riverpod, from the providers. Only the things that we need to be the state to be saved frequently, like the total sum in the home screen, the budget, also the list of expenses. You'll get to see that, which you've already seen even in the home screen, and we're going to interact with the expense list a lot also over here. So we're just displaying the expense count, or the number of expenses that we have, which are 2, which is correct. And now we're going to proceed to call the expense list widget. As you can see, it's displaying today's expenses. So we need to handle that. Let me show you. For example, if we upload a file and take maybe a day before, clothes, fashion, add. So we only see today's. Also here we're seeing today's, but we're supposed to see all the expenses, even the one that we have added, which we set the date to previous. So we're going to add a flag of type bool, and in our home all is false, because that one we're just showing today's. But for this section on the expense log, we'll say all is true. And if we set it to true, what we're going to condition here is that if widget.all, call the get all expenses. Now can you see, in here we're seeing today's, but here we see all the expenses. This is where we see all the expenses. Great, so we have handled that. What's the next thing? So for expense list without filter, we want to handle the delete feature, because I think we have interacted with create, we have interacted with read, we have interacted with update when we are updating the budget, but there's the delete. We haven't used delete anywhere when interacting with Isar Database. So let's do that so that you get to see how it works. So we're just designing a dismissable. This is where when you swipe, you're able to see a certain functionality, and it performs a certain logic on dismiss. Let's just design it first. We'll only get to see it when we try to swipe. So let's just finish. So now our logic will be on dismiss, on dismissed. That's why we'll put our logic. Let's see. So since our class is a stateless widget, we want to pass the widget ref as a props. Because in our previous class where we're calling the expense list without filter, it's a consumer stateful widget. Let's call the ref. Let's pass the ref here. So that we can be able to call a method from one of our providers, which is specifically the expense filter provider. It has the method delete expense, and then we just pass our object, which is snapshot.data, the specific index. There we have it. So if we try to swipe, okay, we can't see anything yet. Let me see. We have our icon delete, we have the text delete, but we can't see them. Okay, let's set the main axis alignment to end. Let's see how that will work. There we have it. So if we decide to swipe, as you can see, our data is gone. And even in our collection, as you can see, we're remaining with now 2 objects in our expense collection. Great. Now let's work on our filter button. So for this button, I think it will navigate us to a screen or a screen. So it will have a scaffold. So let's call it expense filter by, and we'll call our class filter by. So let's add it in our roots because it will be a scaffold. And then let's navigate, add our navigation logic so that we get to see our screen. We refresh, head over to a stats tab and click. Of course, it's displaying a placeholder. Let's remove that. Create a scaffold. Now let's work on our blank screen. We'll add a safe area because throughout the app we haven't used an app bar, so we need a safe area so that everything is in a safe area. Now let's add our children. So we'll have a text widget that displays filter by. Let's style it. So in our row, the next thing we'll have is logic just to navigate.pop or leave the screen. So we'll have cancel of the const, set the size to 30 and the color to our brand color. Then in our row main axis, alignment.space between, there we have it. Okay, so we're going to create a function that will dynamically create for us widgets, just to make it easier to create. So this function will return a type list widget called filters or filter options. That sounds better. So we'll create a column and the children will be initiated to that, whatever will be returned in that function. So in our config.dat we'll add variables called filter options that will hold all those filter options that we'll interact with. And I believe you've seen in part 1 there were quite a lot, so we're going to see them in action. So we're just doing a for loop and then creating a widget for each. That's what we're doing. It will be a card, and inside our card we'll have a list style and our title, and then on top will direct us to a different screen, and our trailing will be icons.keyboard arrow right, save, colors.teal. There we have them. They're all there. So those are most of the filter options that we'll interact with, and I think you can relate with them because we already created that logic for them. Great. So now let's create a new file called expense filter.dat. This is where we'll see the results based on the filter option. So it will extend the consumer stateful widget. We're creating a class filter arguments because there's some props that we'll need to pass to this. So we're just using this enum value to handle. So if somebody selects category, there's a certain view that we're giving them, but the result will be using the expense list widget to display the list of expenses. But the view, the specific view, if it's filtering by category, will only show the list of categories, right? If it's amount range, we'll need to allow the user to enter a low amount and a high amount. So those different views, we need to handle them. So that's why we need to pass in that argument. So there's a lot of views that we're going to design here, honestly. I think this is the one that holds a large chunk of logic. It's made simply, so I believe we'll understand all through. Okay. On top, so we'll navigate that push named dot values I. So that's what will help us know whatever the user, what view we're supposed to display. We'll get to see this. So now that we have the arguments or the props that need to be passed, now let's design our scaffold. So our body will hold a single child scroll view, and the child will hold a safe area. Then we'll proceed to have a column that will have children. Great. So our first child will be a text that will say filter by, and then specify what we're filtering by depending on what we select in the filter options. You see, filter by category. If we select by amount range, it will say filter by amount range, like that. So that's what we're specifying. So we are adding it in a row so that we have another child aligned horizontally, which is the icons.cancel that will have a logic navigator.pop, so that you can always go back to the previous screen. space between so that it spreads out. So as you can see, the title changes based on whatever the user chooses. So let's begin. So we'll divide these views in form of functions. So our first one will be filter by category, and we'll be passing in the filter arguments as an argument, or the args, the props that is passed, which of type filter arguments, we'll be passing it to this function, and it will be returning a visibility widget. Okay, so we're only going to display this specific view if whatever has been passed of props is equals to filter by dot category. So this specific class will be quite extensive because we'll need to display or create all these views for them. So what we need in this specific view, we need to display a grid view showing all the categories, and when the user selects, we perform a filter displaying the list of expenses based on that category that the user has selected. So let's just finish designing our grid view. As I'm doing this, I just realized I should have created this in its own class because we have designed this before in our home tab. But let's just proceed. Yeah, I think we should just because whatever is in children is what we call the expense category item. There's no need of recreating it when it had all the logic of even selecting and all. Yes, so let's just use it. Yep, so when you're selecting, you're able to see what we're selecting. Great. So inside here we have our filter by category. So when we on top, we're going to read from the expense filter provider. We already have these methods with us, so we'll just say call filter by category, and we pass in our specific category. So it will be category num dot values index. So we're passing the specific category of type category num. You see, so we're not doing any of that. We're just now going to be calling our methods from our expense filter provider. But now where do we display them? That's now the next thing. So we're going to create a class called query result, and it will be quite small. It won't be that big. All we're going to do is create a column. We'll have two children. We'll have a text widget that says results. Let's style it. Then the next child will call the expense list widget. Are we filtering? Yes. Is it all true? We're displaying all the list, all the expenses. So that's what we're going to add below. Okay, great. So if we go, why are we saying the yeah. Now we found ourselves in the expense list with filter. That's why. Okay, so let's design it. It will have the same, almost the same as expense without. I'll show you what will change. Just copy that. So we have our list view. We'll remove the dismissible because we're not performing deletion here. We'll also remove the let's see, is it the gesture detector? No, that one is fine. That one is fine. We'll watch the expense filter provider. That's what we're going to pass to our expense detail. Okay. So instead of the snapshot.data, what we're passing is the ref.watch expense filter provider. So it's going to listen. Because now whenever we call any method from the expense filter provider, you'll find that we were always updating the state to the whatever we receive from the respective functions in the mixin class, if you remember that. So what we're doing, we're just watching, because whenever we are performing these filter options will be updated. As you can see, we are updating the state. So we need, on this side it's watching, on this other side it's actually updating the state. So that's what it means. That's what we are doing. So if we try and add another expense tracker builds, as you can see, it's smoothly updating our expense list widget, because whenever we click and call the methods in our provider, it updates the state. And as you can see, the expense list widget is actually listening to the state. So that's what's happening. Okay, I hope it makes sense. Now in our expense list with filter, we just want to add our empty widget. So if the state is actually empty, because remember the state might be what the type of that state holds data type of list widget, so it could be empty. If it's empty, we want to call our, as you can see, our empty widget. If there is a value, we'll display the specific the list of expenses. I think that's smooth and clean. So we're going to be updating our query result class like that. We're not going to, we've already done everything. It's going to be updating based on the state that's been set in our provider. So now let's create another function for filter by amount range. We will always be passing the arguments, and then the filter by amount range will be of type, will hold the data type of visibility, because here we're mainly designing the views, and all our views are going to be managed based on the visibility. So we'll have two text fields, one that allows the user to enter a low amount, and another one that allows the user to enter a larger amount. And then when we proceed to call our method from our provider, it's going to check the range from our Isar database. We added the functionality for that, where it will be able to check between the low amount and the high amount. There we have our two text fields. Because you can see the results section, it's just waiting. So right now the state is empty. So we're adding our button, two of them actually. One will reset, the other one will now proceed to call one of our methods from our provider. So when we reset, that means we'll clear the text fields, and also in our expense filter provider, we're going to read the method clear state. We added that as well. So we'll just set the state to an empty list. That's what it means. We're just styling our outline button. Then let's have another button, but now it will be an elevated button. So all we're doing is that we're checking if our text fields are valid. Let's proceed to call our method from the expense filter provider. We call the method filter by amount range, and then we pass in our values of in type double. So we're passing in the low value that the user has set and the high value. Done. We're just styling it because it's off from our regular design. That's better. Let's just create a small space between the two buttons, and we can use the sized box of width 10. That's enough. Yep. So let's enter 100 and 500 if we apply. So we have values, let's see, 50 to 200. And there we have it. It's able to display the range. As you remember, we said that include lower false. So it's not including the lower. If we set it to true, let's proceed and enter. What will we enter? I can see the reset is not working, but let's just enter 100 to 500. Now we're able to see the expenses that are 100. So we can just return it to false, but you can always set it to true. I just wanted to show you that. So our clear state is not working. I think we need to initialize it to an empty list. Oh, that's better. Now it's working. Okay, so 2 down. How many more to go? So we need to filter by amount. So we can design that quickly. As now you know the trend, our views will always be of type visibility because it always checks what type of filter option has the user selected. If it is amount, it will display. If it's this specific filter by, it's going to display the respective views. So that's simply what we're doing. And then all through we are interacting with Riverpod. We're interacting with the providers that we designed, and we already set all our methods, so we're not really playing around with that logic. It's just a matter of calling our methods and seeing the results. So creating another enum value called amount filter, just to show greater than and less than. So when we're filtering by amount, we're just using where it's greater. So we're going to use two methods from our provider, the greater one, greater than, and the less than. So if the user selects greater than and then enters the amount, maybe greater than 200, we'll call the greater than filter by greater than method from our provider. If they select less than, we'll call that the less than method. So we're using two methods here. So we're just designing our radio list tile. That's the one that's going to display those two options. So there we have them, greater than and less than, but we're not able to show the one that the user has selected. Let's see. So there is a text field and the buttons apply and reset again. We'll tend to use those two a lot. So I just displayed that, and then I don't know why we're not able to see what greater than else. So just with the logic, I've just pasted it as is. So what we're doing is that if the user selects greater than, we call the filter by amount greater than, as I mentioned. Else, if the user selects less than, we call the filter by amount less than. And then it's able to handle the state for us based on what Isar Database will provide to us. So let's see. Because we have performed the set state, but it seems let's remove it and put it outside in the filter class. Nice. Okay, now let's set 100, less than 100. Apply. There we have an expense of 20. So it's working. So let's proceed to the next filter option, since there's so many. But as you have noticed, is we're just calling the methods as they are. As long as we pass in the correct arguments, the methods that we created in our providers, or the logic that we added from the adapter to the repository classes to our mixing class, all that, we are able to get back our results. I'll just need to display or copy the grid view as is and just paste it here. We just copy that. Great. There we have it. And then we are going to add let's add a text field. Let's set its text editing controller. I'll have all this code, the source code, the link to the source code in the description box below for the design itself, rather than explaining each and every detail. But the most important part is showing you where we're injecting the logic and being able to see the right results, right? So if the amount.text is not empty, filter by amount. So we're just removing some unnecessary logic. But this one is from the previous. So we're saying we're going to call the method filter by amount and category. So we need to pass two arguments. Selected item, yeah. So let's select food, amount greater 39. As you can see, it's applying. Let's see, but wait, amount high. Oh, okay, greater than. Okay, amount greater than, that's why. Okay, yep. So let's reset clothes. So we're selecting where the clothes, the category is clothes, and the amount is greater than whatever the user has inserted. There we have it. So it's working. Let's see. And this is where we were using the OR feature. So it's either or. 100. So there's no category called fun. Let's see, 500. So it's displaying an expense of type food. So it's either or if it's a category of food or the amount is greater than 500. So in this case, there's no expense with an amount of 500, but there is an expense that is of category food. That's how or works. So let's create another filter view. For this one, we'll be showing a list of expenses that are not in the others category. Okay, this should be easy. Just passing a regular argument, returning a visibility. Filter by dot not others. We're just picking our two famous buttons, the reset and apply. So in our apply, we don't need that. What we'll pass what the method will call will be filter by not others. Simply that, it does not expect any argument. So if we click, as you can see, but we do not have any expense in others. So let's create one and see if we'll display, if the results will display it. So there is others in today's, it's there in the expense log. So if we apply, we don't see it, so the query is correct. Now let's work on group filter. So we have our two buttons, a reset and apply, but then we'll need more widgets. So what this filter is going to, it's going to be working on expenses of the category of type others. So we added it in our logic, but since the user does not know, so we have to display it somewhere in form of a text widget. So this is about the category others. So then we're creating a list style. It's the same list style that we designed, where we were able to see the date, and then on the other side we're able to allow the user to select a date. So this part of the logic is quite familiar. We're going to call the show date picker, and whatever the user selects will be initialized to the selected date. Okay, it's not setting. Okay, set state. Great. So now it's setting. Okay. So just handling the logic on the outline pattern. We reset the controller and the selected date, and then in our elevated we'll call the filter by group filter, and we'll need to pass in the date and also the search text that the user has inserted. And remember, the search text, we are going to, on the group filter, we are searching the subcategory name. It's not displayed in the expense detail, but I remember there was one, what was it? Because we haven't displayed subcategories on our expense detail. But if we select and enter occasion, is it subcategory or the tags? It is subcategory. I'm sure of that. Oh, it's the payment method. Yeah. Okay, so in the category for expense, that's in the category of others. So we set cash apply. You know what the problem is? If I enter card, we'll see it. But if we enter credit, we won't see it. Because credit is in capital C, as you can see. So that problem is to do with case sensitivity. That's what it is. So we can proceed to remove the case sensitivity. Now for filter by payment method, it's just a text field and then listening on unchanged. So we have cash. Let's enter cash. There we have it. We're seeing the result in real time. Let's try card. There we have our expenses. What else? Let's just remove the case sensitivity. So that whether we put capital C or small c doesn't matter. We should have done it also on the other one. So filtering by payment method, it's working. So let's look at filter by any selected category. We're almost there, guys. We're almost there. I think we have how many more filter options? Just a few. We pass our args. Filter by dot any selected category. So you know what we'll have there. We'll need to display our grid view again, showing our list of our categories. But now we want to allow the user to select more than one category. That's what we'll do here. So I've just pasted the logic here. It's the same grid view, but now we've just managed the allowing the user to select more than one category. So that's where, as you can see. So if we select 3, you see our variable selected items is of type list int. So that's what it all does. And now with our list, we're going to pass it to the method filter by using any, and just pass our categories there. But remember that our categories have to be of type enum. So if we apply, it shows us the list of expenses on either of the selected categories. That's what any of does. So we're going to add now for all selected categories, which won't make sense. We'll show the logic. Of course, there'll be no result on that because one expense is connected to one category. If we were setting an expense to more than one category, I think this would have worked. But let's just add the logic so that if you, in case you want to play around with the schema and decide the expense should have more than one category, you can run this specific function and see whether it works. So we just copied from the any selected category, and just now we're calling filter by any. So when we apply, it won't work because what it's saying is that we want to get an expense or list of expenses that have all these categories that we have selected. One expense should have all those categories, so that's not possible. So the result will be empty. Get objects. So that's what all of is basically. So it's like and an expense that has the transport and fun and clothes. And the use case does not show that. So now let's filter by tags. Filter by tags is where we're just filtering list of expenses that have a number of tags. Simply, that's what we're doing. So that you see that you can also query through a list, a property of type list. So a list by category, just passing context. It will only have a drop down, so we're just going to set a drop down of some values like 0 tags, 1 tag, 0 tags, 2 tags, 3 tags, 5 tags. So whatever the user selects, we use that. Filter by tags. So there we have it. So if we select 2, so we have some expenses with more than 5, 4, 3. So that's basically that we're doing. So what it teaches us is the concept of being able to interact with properties that are of type list. It's as easy as that. So we're going to create another one called filter by tag name. And now we're going to search through elements in a list, elements in a property of type list, which we already have, which is the one that we are calling descriptions. So we want to see if we can actually search through. So we already have the view displayed, and it has a text field where the user can enter a value. So just going to use the search controller for that and see how that will work. So we're searching through the element, as you can see, the elements of the property description. So let's search something monthly. There we have exactly. So that's working. Let's do another, the next filter option. Filter by subcategory. So remember, subcategory is an embedded object. So we also wanted to show how to filter in a subcategory in an embedded object. So let's create a view for that. And remember, the subcategory, its property is a name, which is of type string. So you can just let the user enter a search text, and we'll proceed to go and filter the subcategory. There we have our view. So if we try and search, we don't have the subcategory displayed in our expense details, but let's enter water, because I remember we entered water. Yep, dress, we had dress as well. Great. So that's working. So we want to filter by receipt, filter by the photos that we are uploading for our expenses. Let's create that. But the good thing is that in the Isar database, we are storing the receipt name. Remember, we're not storing blobs or the images themselves, so we can use the receipt name to get our respective photos or images. So there is our view, and we're going to use the search controller to allow the user to enter the name of the receipt. Let's enter water. There we have it. Then let's work on filter by pagination. Let's design our view for that. So it shows us how to load a specific number of items through pagination, or you can use that to paginate your list of items, which is really cool. Let's add int offset is equals to 0. I'm just adding a few more expenses so that we have something to paginate. We have a number of expenses to paginate rather than 4. So that will be quick. So there are our expenses. So if we try and paginate, as you can see, it moves from the first items to the next to the next. Okay, so now let's look at filter by insertion. This is where we want to delete the first item or view the first item, and also have the option to delete that first item. So there is our view. We have another enum type. Just to handle that, we'll have two options where we handle find first and then delete first. There we have it. So if we click on find first, you see the first value, and when we delete it, we get to see the rest of the values. Simply as that. I think we have implemented all our filter options. That was quite extensive, and as you can see, as we continue to play around with the app, the states are being managed. We're able to receive the correct information from Isar Database, which is really cool, and it's quite fast. So the next thing we want to do in our gallery is just to display our images. So instead of a text widget, we'll add a future builder, and then let's inject the mixin class and proceed to call get all receipts, so that you can be able to display all our images. If snapshot.data is equals to null, we also call our empty widget there. Else we'll display a column widget, and our column will hold we're going to display our receipts, but also we want to add another functionality where we'll be able to clear the gallery itself, and clearing is just a matter of deleting all the receipts that we have in our that we have recorded in our Isar database. And the way we created that function was to show how creating transactions looks like. So we use a for loop, and we loop through all the receipts, deleting one by one. So the purpose of that was to just show how to interact with transactions, because transactions involves multiple queries passed, And once all of them are executed successfully, that's when the transaction has been completed. Another way to do it will be just to call delete all method that's in the Isar database. But I intentionally used the for loop to explain how transactions are implemented in the Isar database, mainly inside the write transaction method. So I've just installed a package called Insta Image Viewer, just for us to not only display our image but also view it. So we're using the path that we got, our path, which is from get applications document directory, to be able to display the correct images. Because without the correct path, we won't be able to display the images. Remember, we are saving the file names only in the Isar database, so we need the rest of the path. There we have them. So these are all the images or the receipts, and then when we try to delete, we'll no longer be able to see our images. And as you can see in our individual expenses, we don't have receipts in them, so we have deleted them successfully. So let's just create another expense. Add, and there we have our image, and we're able to view it or zoom it in and see. So the gallery section is complete. It was simply just displaying and being able to delete. And yeah, so in our settings there isn't much logic. We're just going to implement only one functionality. We'll have a design where we'll be able to allow the user to set enable face ID and also set a currency. Then we'll have a button that will allow us to clear all the data in the Isar database. So to show currency, we need a specific package. We're just adding that to close in on this, called the currency picker. We just imported it. So how our settings looks like, we have enable face ID, which we're not putting the logic in. If you want to get the logic to enable biometric authentication, I'll share the link down below to that video. And to be able to save the currency, you can either use shared preferences or any other simple local storage to save that. We're not storing it in the Isar database. I'll let you do that. But for the clear data, we now want to try and clear the clear data. Will clear all the data in the Isar database. But before we do that, the two buttons that we had set in the home widget. Let's work on them first, and then now when we clear our data, we have implemented all the functionalities, so we're good to go. So let's have a look at full text search, and we're going to design a screen that will allow the user to enter a keyword, and we'll be able to search through our Isar database. So the property that we're using is in our expense collection, which is called description. Remember, it's a of type list that holds our strings. Now what we're storing is what the user enters as tags, right? But another idea that we could extend is, or you could extend, is inserting more tags other than what the user has inserted. We can also add other tags in the background on anything that the user may have entered other than the tags. From the payment method, we can just inject that in the description property. to the category, to also the amount. So that means the type of the list that the list will be holding can change to dynamic. So that's another idea you can take, so that other than the tags that the user has inserted, we add more based on that specific expense, so that whatever that they actually decide to search, when we go to do our search through the Isar database, we'll get more from it. But for now, since whatever we're storing in the description property in the expense collection is mainly what the user inserts as tags whenever they're creating expenses. So we have a scaffold that we have designed, and in our app bar, we're just going to create a text field where the user will insert this keyword. Let's just decorate it. On changed, we'll proceed to call the widget ref and read the expense filter provider, and call the method filter by full text search and pass in the keyword that the user has inserted. And that should simply allow us to search through the Isar database. So for our body, we're just going to call our famous expense list widget. This is the one that always displays for us a list of expenses. So we're just setting our flags. And there we have it. So let's try and search. As you can see, we're able to view an expense based on the search that we're looking for. Let's do this. Let's set the padding. So if we search bills, vacation, as you can see, there we have it. Let's search for coffee. As you can see, we're able to see the list expenses based on that. Now let's have a look at watchers. This is a way of subscribing to changes in the database by listening to any part of the database, either it's queries, a collection, or an object. So in our case, we're going to head over to our mixin class and create a simple function which we'll later inject in our main.dot. So we'll call our function set watcher, and it will be of a return type of void future. So we'll define a variable called expense change that will be of type stream list expense. So we're going to go and call our Isar instance and call our Isar collection expenses and do a filter dot date equal to the current time. So we're filtering expenses where the date is equivalent to today. And we are watching that. Then we'll proceed to listen. So this is what we're going to do. We want to check if the user has more than 5 expenses for the day. Maybe let's say 7. We can send them a message of some sort using a scaffold messenger, and that will display a snack bar. And this snack bar will have a text that says you have too many expenses for today. So that's just a simple example of how you can use watchers. We are listening to using a query, and if the expenses are more than that, we're going to be displaying that message to the user so that they're able to see that they have more than 7 expenses. So we are going to inject it in our home class right at the build. So right now we have less than 7. So let's try and create another expense and see if we'll be able to see our watcher. 1, 2, 3. We have 6. Let's add another one. So the Isar database is actually listening, or we've created a listener that listens to whatever is happening in our database. 4, 5, 6, 7. So we said greater than 7, not greater than or equal to. So what we expect is when we create this 8th expense, you should be able to get an alert. And there we have it. You have too many expenses for today. So our watcher is working perfectly. And that's how you implement watchers. You can listen through queries, objects, or collections. And you can see it has disappeared because we have deleted one. Now let's have a look at data serialization and synchronization. I'm putting them together because they'll need each other. They'll work hand in hand. So we're going to interact with Firebase here. So if you have Firebase, let's just proceed to the Firebase console. I just added a few strings in a collection in the Firestore that represents payment methods. So in our app, we have payment methods, but we set them up in a config file. But what we want to do is be able to import data from an external party, like a third party like Firebase, and display it in our app that will be stored in our Isar database. So I decided to use a field for the payment method to do this. So what we need to do is to install the FireDat package. Make sure you've added like a few sources of income in a collection in your Firestore to be able to do that, as I have shown. And then now that we have FireDat, we are going to create a function called import data from Firebase. So we're going to import it from Firebase, store it in our Isar database, and then our drop-down for payment method will read from there. So we're defining a variable called incomes of type list that holds income type. So we're checking if Firestore is not initialized. Let's proceed to initialize it. And we initialize it passing the project ID. This is mine, but I'll end up deleting it. So add yours in it. Then once we have initialized, we'll proceed to pick the instance of our Firestore and then proceed to get our collection, which, as I had shown, mine is called expense tracker. Then we're going to proceed to get. Let's just see it in the we proceed to get from that collection. Then we call a promise, and in our event, we'll proceed to call our incomes Isar collection. So before we insert anything to the incomes, I think now you're saying that we actually had a collection that we hadn't interacted with. This is why this is where we now get to use it. Before we insert anything to the collection, we just want to clear it, because this is not data that we want to repeatedly add. We don't want duplicates. We just want it called once. So we just clear under the write transaction method in the Isar instance. And then once we have cleared it, now we head over to whatever we have received from the Firestore, which is event. So we're doing a for loop. For each, we're going to design an income object. So here we are designing the name, then an income object that will hold the value doc.map. And then we're going to pick the name, because that's the key that's in the Firestore, specifically in our collection. So once we create our income object, we'll be adding it to our list variable that we defined at the top. And now that we have done that, we'll proceed to call our income repository class. And we had a function called create multiple objects. We'll just pass in our list object there. So that's simply what we have done. We have received the list from our Firestore. We've proceeded to clear our incomes collection, and now we are adding the objects into our incomes collection using the income repository class. So in our expense, the list of sources that we are displaying is from the config.dat. But what we want to display is whatever we have received from the Firestore and we have stored in our income collection. So what we're going to do, we're going to initialize a variable called payment methods that will hold of type list income. Then all we want to do is watch. We're picking from the, let's see, it should be a consumer stateful widget so that we can interact with the widget ref. So let's just update that in our expense widget, because we'll be interacting with one of the providers that we designed. There we have it. What else? We don't need to add that. Well, that happens in the consumer widget. So we're watching our expense income provider, but we don't have it. We didn't design it. So let's design an income provider. Income provider.dat. And inside there we'll do the usual, create a Riverpod class or a function if you actually use functions instead. So we'll name our class expense income provider, expense income. And in our build, we're going to proceed to call the function in our mixin class, which is, let's see if we added it, because we hadn't worked on most of the functionalities for income. So we'll have a get all income, and then we'll just proceed to call our income repository class and get the function from there, get all objects. There we have it. So now let's call it in our provider. So our build will hold a type of list income, a list of income objects in short. There we have it, but of type future. So let's run the build runner for a minute for it to generate for us the dynamic code. Let's do it again. Great. Now let's go back to our expense screen. So calling our expense, reading from our expense, watching our expense income provider, and we'll proceed to perform our switch case. We'll receive the value. The value will be of type list income, and that's what we're going to add to our dropdown. And if there's an error, just return an empty list, else return an empty list. That's what we're doing. So you just want to remove our variable, this one, so that now we can get to see our errors. So wherever there is a string, we're going to add income, value.name, income. Our drop-down values of type string, it should be income. What else? Income. There we have it. Our error is gone. Let's refresh. What's the other error? Dot name. Okay, because we still want to save the string in our expense. That's why we're picking the name of the. So as you can see, let's see. Okay. Why isn't it not displaying? So we performed this logic import data from Firebase, but it's not being called anywhere. That's why. So I'm just going to create instead of adding two functions in my home class, let's create one function that will call background work, where we'll add our set watcher that we created previously, and then add our import data from Firebase, because we need this to be loaded at the point when the app is running for the first time. So there we have it. We have our list of income, sources of income, and this is coming from the Firebase. I hope that makes sense. Next thing will be, let's see. So in terms of data synchronization, we are able to import data from a third party, and we've been able to save it in the Isar database. And what is happening is that for the payment method, we are reading from the Isar database. So where there is import, let's just add an expense. We see it work. Now that we have updated. Of course, our watches are still working. As you can see, our payment method, mobile money. So things are working well. Oh, great. Now let's create a function. Where there's import data, we need a functionality to export data. So we want to export data to Firebase. You can use any other third party that you may be interested in. But in this case, we're just using the Firebase, specifically the Firestore. So what we're going to export is the list of expenses that we have in our Isar database. So just call await get all expenses, and then we're going to use a Firestore instance. Head over to a collection, create a collection called expenses.get then. And now that we have from our expenses variable where we get all the expenses that we have, we're going to do a for loop. Expense.reference.delete. So we make sure that that collection is clear before we add. That's what we're doing. So we're deleting first everything in the collection in the Firestore, sorry, because they're both collections. Now that we have cleared the collection in the Firestore, we proceed now to add our expenses to our collection, to the collection in the Firestore. They both have the word collection, so it can be quite confusing. But now we can't upload it just like that, because this is a custom object, expense object. Firestore doesn't know that, right? So this is where data serialization comes in. So we'll need, it depends whichever package that you'll use, but here we're going to use a JSON serializable. And we're also going to add the JSON annotation. Now let's work on our expense class or expense collection. We're going to add a few things. So we're going to annotate our class also as a JSON serializable class, and we're getting it from the JSON annotation package. So let's create two methods that we'll need from JSON and to JSON. And the one that we're going to use mainly is to JSON for exporting data. So map string dynamic to JSON. Let's run the build runner so that our two methods are generated. We have an error. Let's just comment this first, because the build runner fails to run if there are errors within the app. Let's run it again. Still failed. Has no default constructor. So let's add that. Okay, so a subcategory is an embedded object, right? So we're going to have a hard time converting it from JSON or to JSON. The JSON serializable does not understand that. So what we're going to implement is a JSON converter. It's going to convert for us from subcategory to string and from string to subcategory. So that's the work of this class here that we'll call custom subcategory converter. So whenever in the process of converting to JSON or from JSON, when it comes to the subcategory property, it will proceed to this custom subcategory converter and convert if it's from JSON or to JSON. It's going to convert the subcategory to a string. dynamically. So we need this. If you find yourself in situations where you have a different type in the list of properties, which tends to happen, um, you can use the JSON converter to convert it for you. And once you set that, you just inject it as an annotation for it in your class. Yeah, so we have the constructor. Okay, yeah. And as you can see now, we're able to add it as an annotation. So when JSON serializable is actually, the conversion is being done to JSON, whenever it reaches to the property of subcategory, it will use the custom subcategory converter that we have created to convert that subcategory to a string. So if you ever have other types of properties that are not like that data types, you can create JSON converters for them. So now we're good. Now back to our export data to Firebase. We now call to JSON. So it will convert our expense object to JSON, because what Firestore understands is our JSON objects. So that's the part of the code. We receive all our expenses from our Isar database. We clear our collection in our Firestore called expenses, and now we just added all the expenses. Let's see. So now from our icon, we need to call this function, right? In our homepage, we had a certain button that had the icons.sync. So we're just going to add a flag so that when we click, it shows loading. When it's done, it goes back to the icon. That means it has finished uploading the expenses to the Firestore. That's just what we just use a experience that we're adding here. So we add in our mixin class so that we can access the function that we've created, export data to Firebase. So the moment we click on this icon button, it should be able to pick all the expenses from the Isar database and store them in the Firestore. So if we click on it, the loading should show the circular progress indicator, and then proceed to run the function. Once it has run the function, we remove the circular progress indicators. So let's try. It's loading. It's uploading to the Firestore and done. So let's try and see it in our Firestore just to see if it has actually worked. So there we have our expenses collection, and these are all our expenses from the Isar from our local database.